It says recording started.
Yeah, it's recording. C talk stuff to make your C's walk. I don't know what's going on with my banners. The banners is not popping up right now, so um, not able to put the questions up there. But y'all can follow along with the conversation here. Interesting conversation I like to have with Bobby. We gonna have to like start labeling these appropriately, like legal talks and whatnot.
Mhm.
Excuse my eyes right now. I mean, I got watery eyes, man. So I spent, like Bobby and I were talking earlier offline. I spent um a lot of time binge watching this Watchmen. I finally caught up and started watching that on HBO, and I ended up staying up to like 8 a.m. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going through it right now. So Bobby and I were supposed to get on like 2 or 3 hours ago, and I was like, man, I need a couple more hours of rest, man. After going through the mental gymnastics, and I ended up dreaming about the Watchmen and us doing this live, and Bobby explaining what it meant and stuff. And it's, anyways. But anyways, legal talks here with Bobby, and I have an interesting question. And one of the questions sparked his legal mind, him being an attorney and whatnot. And the question I asked was, is it a form of sexual assault or even rape if someone has consensual sex and then after the fact feels uncomfortable or traumatized by the experience? And it's really interesting because um I know Bobby has his first initial thoughts, and I want to get into that, but there's a lot of questions and scenarios, and what Bobby doesn't like too much is hypotheticals that came up after that we're going to get into. But what was the first thing that came to your mind? Because you say six, I say nine. You know what I'm saying? And some things came to my mind first that didn't come to your mind first. So when I presented that scenario of consensual sex happens, but after the fact, one of the persons, and I'm going, non-gender specific for a reason. You know what I'm saying? And that's how you keep, certain, debates, arguments, and discussions very objective, is when you take out gender. And then we can insert it when it's, when it's appropriate and when it's contextual. But you have consensual sex, and one of the people involved with it, felt traumatized by that experience, felt triggered for whatever reason, felt uncomfortable. Is that a form of sexual assault or a form of rape after the fact? And what was the first thing that came to mind when you heard that
The,
scenario, or that
the
inquiry?
first thing that came to mind was a hard no. I kind of break the act into three phases, just like a movie, beginning, middle, and end. If myself or any other person out there is giving or accepting consent and all three of those phases and the act is over with, and there's not a moment during the act where you can say that consent wasn't present, then no sexual battery has occurred, period. End of
From a
sentence.
legal standpoint.
Yeah, nothing has occurred. I
Mhm.
do think that it's possible, though, for somebody to have consent for all three phases, and then in that fourth phase, I guess, which would be the reaction, the stopping and thinking about what just occurred, saying, I didn't appreciate this, or I didn't appreciate that, although I allowed it. Well, now we're going to get into some really complicated scenarios where people are going to say, well, maybe I only gave consent for phase 2 or 2.5 because of fill in the blank. But that is such a road with stickers and bushes on it that I hope people do not think that that's a good road to go down, because the application of that law, if it existed, would be so uneven. Because
Mhm.
what it would result in is that people who can generate sympathy or empathy from juries, or people who look like they're more trustworthy, whatever that means, would have no problem defeating those claims. But people who maybe we don't trust because of the way they look, because of their level of education, because of their IQ, because of their criminal record, etc., would all of a sudden be at a much greater risk of being convicted of sexual assault or sexual battery or rape simply because somebody is reclassifying an event that already occurred and was already completed, which I think is a complete miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, you took it a step further where I was going to go, but what you're talking about is the introduction of the P word, power. And, when we talk about power, one of the things that I thought about further down the line, it wasn't the first thing, but coercion and consent. There's a difference.
Sure.
And there's power that plays a part in that. And then when your scenario, I like how you presented, you said like, there's a first stage of consent, kind of like the medium stage of consent, and then there's the resolution. But then that fourth stage is like kind of the aftermath. You know what I'm saying? Like how you felt about it. And power plays a big role in that.
Sure.
So like say a person, going gender neutral again, intentionally, a person has more power than the other person. Say that they're a supervisor, their manager, or they hold the outcomes of their employment, the boss.
That would be, but that would be,
that's coercion.
That's getting real close to rape, if not for sure rape, because if your ability to consent is at all manipulated. So, for example,
your employment or resources or opportunities to upgrade your status of living if you don't, concede.
Sure. Well, I think there's different ways. I think there's different ways to manipulate consent. So, for example, the college example that is usually the most relevant in young people's minds is, how does alcohol change this? And young men especially, will be frustrated by this, but they need to just accept this reality. Someone who's drunk cannot give you consent, because consent is something that you give with knowledge and voluntarily. So if there's something that changes your ability to volunteer, if there's something that changes your ability to make an informed decision, that's not consent. And if you have reason to know that that person's ability to make an objective decision is somehow impacted, and again, that's why I said I think there's a lot of ways to look at it, impacted by power, impacted by their socioeconomics, etc., then of course there's going to be challenges to whether that's actually consent.
Yeah, and that's why people need to be very aware and be careful when they're involving drugs or alcohol in their sexual experiences, because
or power.
Yeah. I mean, because people can interpret that a totally different way, and when you're not sober and you're making decisions, you know what I'm saying, then they can be like, well, this element was introduced, into the equation, and had it not been, then I might have made a different decision.
Absolutely.
But I was thinking more of the coercion part of, I would have made a different decision if I wasn't your quote unquote inferior or subordinate or whatnot, or if I didn't work for you. And, some people, might say after the fact, yeah, I consented to a whole bunch of, stuff, and it was cool. But after the fact, I felt uncomfortable and I was traumatized by it, because I was kind of thinking like, man, I felt some kind of way because you're in a position of power. And now that I think about it, I probably wouldn't have done it, if we were kind of like adjacent, or, have, parallel power positions, you know what I mean? And that's why, it's, you shouldn't really be having, any kind of sexual relations with someone who works for you.
Yeah.
Or underneath you, pun intended, for that, specific reason, because it can get really problematic. We saw that situation with some football players. One in particular, I can think of one case. I can't really remember his name, but, I guess he was making it kind of routine to have sexual relations with his trainers and his
Antonio Brown.
I think it might have been him. I don't want to start telling the truth or a lie.
He did that. That was a thing.
Okay. And then, like, I think it was like his massage therapist. See, I don't want to get little delicate and intricate details wrong and then say the wrong name. But this can be a very generic example that's probably happening right now. People having sex with their trainers, their masseuse, therapists, and whatnot. and then it coming out like, man, you know what I'm saying? Kind of thought I was going to get fired if I didn't, you know what I'm saying, have sex with them and whatnot. You know, I would lose a client, you know what I'm saying? And so that kind of thing comes up. But something interesting came up on the thread. And so we started discussing this. And then one of the people, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, I'll throw in a couple of details just to add context, but it may not be completely accurate. A woman, you know, presenting, you know what I'm saying, commenter, you know, like the picture looks like a woman and whatnot. The name, you know, is, you know, you know, gender aligned with a woman and whatnot. You know what I'm trying to say. You know,
we're working so hard to say, go ahead.
Exactly, because you don't know. It could be a bot.
Right.
It could be a white girl. It could be a white boy, a white 14-year-old boy, you know what I'm saying, in a room board, you know what I'm saying, on Christmas break. But so anyways, this person says any sexual experience that results in trauma is sexual assault. And I was like, wow. And then they double down. A continuation of their argument as they doubled down was there is no sexual assault without trauma. Therefore, so they used the logic, the reverse logic. Therefore, if there is trauma, that is evidence of sexual assault. I said, that's not how logic works. You know what I'm saying? I got a couple degrees, a master's. I definitely took logic class, not, you know, as a first name, but actually as a class at the university level. And that is not how logic works.
So isn't that the old if it's cloudy, or if it's rainy, then it's cloudy, but if it's cloudy, it isn't necessarily rainy? Isn't it that exercise?
You know, it's more fresh in your mind than it is mine, because, you know, you took the bar, and this is a part of, you know, your whole, you know what I'm saying, infrastructure and how your mind works in the courtroom. But I know for sure that's not how that logic works.
No, because there's plenty of things that you can give your consent to for all three phases and still be traumatized by.
Absolutely.
So, and I'll do this. I'll put myself in a scenario that would be embarrassing just for fun.
Okay.
So
let's hypothetical. This real.
Well, you can. I don't care either way. That's the thing. That's what makes it fun, because this could have absolutely happened to me.
What makes it safe?
because if I said one time I had intercourse and I did a particularly bad job, and this person told me you did a bad job, right?
Gotcha.
And then I was like, yeah, you caught me slipping there. And then afterwards, I thought, I'm less likely to sleep with that person again because of the way they made me feel about my performance. Is that trauma? I think that trauma, at least for me, and I could look it up on my phone right now. But
it is trauma, though.
So I just want to make sure. I would think that the clinical definition of trauma would be something where trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event. Immediately after event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. So I could very easily say that after she told me I did a bad job, my confidence suffered, and I got more nervous about every other sexual encounter that I was willing to have after that because of her comments to me.
But the one thing, sorry to cut you off, I just want to say, because I'm an English lit guy and I'm an educator, so I knew you were gonna say that form of definition. The only thing I don't like about that definition is the same thing I don't like with most definitions of trauma is the word terrible.
Okay.
I do not.
Because it doesn't have to be terrible.
I don't bear witness that trauma has to always be a terrible feeling. It's an impression.
So psychology
leaves an impression, I think.
Well, actually, I mean, that's what's interesting, because if you go to psychology today, they say trauma is a person's emotional response to a distressing experience. And I think that's probably better.
Distressing, though? It doesn't always have to be distressing, does it?
You could just say, how about we just say to an experience, period?
Right.
It's an emotional response.
Exactly.
An experience.
Because, you know, me getting in my poetic bag, me being a rapper and a poet, I have come up with this thing that is called good trauma.
Mm.
Like I have good trauma. I have impressions that have, like smells, but we call it a different thing. But just take away the one adjective of terrible or distressing, and it is trauma. And I don't think trauma should hinge on one or two adjectives. I think it should be a little bit more objective.
So it's very much like peer pressure, where there's positive peer pressure, where
Absolutely.
your peers can say, no, you can do this. You should do this. Come on, let's go. It's Max is in the weight room.
That motivation. We don't call that
get this weight up. You're going to get this weight up. And then there's, hey, bro, you want to smoke this? Everybody else is smoking this.
Exactly.
Right?
We call when someone's like quote unquote pressuring you to do something good or positive, or what we
encouragement.
And we call that motivation.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? There's all kinds of moral standards and contexts that are infused in a lot of the words that we use. But anyway.
But digressing though, the point was
that
person's comment to me could elicit a response from me that makes me less likely to engage in the activity with her, but also with other people moving forward in time.
Yep.
And to me, when people talk about trauma, they talk about things that moving forward in time, they're impacted by that original event.
Absolutely. I think you're hypothetical, or your real whatever is a really good one. And I think it's very common, you know what I'm saying? Especially now we're gonna go gender specific. Now we can get into that bag, that power bag, because it's used to leverage and harness power. And y'all gonna understand what I'm talking about when I get into this. The comments and derogatory comments about the size of a male's genitalia is very common. And I understand the reason why it's used by women many times is to harness and leverage some kind of power that they feel like they don't have in that exchange. Because a lot of sexual exchanges hinges upon and is founded on the power dynamic that men are in control. They have the micromanagement, you know what I'm saying, in that situation most of the time. However, just because that power dynamic exists collectively in a social context doesn't mean that every single time that should be applied to a man to dehumanize him or to make him feel less than. So a comment about the size of a male's genitalia can be really, really traumatizing after the fact, but that does not mean that man was sexually assaulted.
But that's not criminal. And that's what we're talking about. Like, ultimately, that's not criminal. So having your feelings hurt as a result of something that you allowed later, even if it was 1 second later, even if it was during, it doesn't matter if there's consent for that act on a criminal level. There's a difference. Mm-hmm. And trying to use the criminal code and expand it to include emotional injuries for things you physically consented to is wildly dangerous.
Yeah, I think you described it what I really appreciated, and I'm gonna have to put this in my bag. You saying using criminal codes for personal reasons, which could kind of get slippery, but I understood what you meant. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about in terms of power, what would happen is you're adding extra phases, extra stages to the consent game. So imagine if every time you slept with somebody, you had to call them on 3 days after, the 72-hour rule. You have to call them on the third day to make sure that they were still okay with it after the fact. Because if they weren't, then you might get arrested for.
Hey, I'm gonna keep it a kilo, man. And you talk about, hypotheticals and whatnot like that. I think that happens a lot, man.
But you're utilizing that
with men, specifically with Black men, when they're dealing with, certain types of, people or women,
when they cross the racial line.
Yeah, and we're about to get into that too. They might give them a call and be like, "Hey, man, you okay? What happened the other night? Just making sure everything's cool and stuff like that." That could even be, risky and problematic. It's like, okay,
don't make that call.
Exactly, because like,
don't do that.
What wouldn't it make it okay? And here's another example too. Like, there were so many examples and hypotheticals that we're going through, and Here's another problematic one, because it brings in the consumption of alcohol or some kind of drug, right? So I presented the hypothetical of, what if someone vomits, during, a sexual experience or different sexual intercourse? That can be highly traumatic. Now, I've heard like stories about that.
Everybody has heard stories.
Okay. So if they were intoxicated in the form of alcohol and they vomited it, were they intoxicated to the point they were drunk and they couldn't provide consent? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, let's say they mixed, some light and some dark. You know what I'm saying? Or what if they had an edible and their body, reacted the same way, still was like, yeah, I still want to get it on. You know what I'm saying? I still want to have sex with you. And then that's traumatizing.
That's going to make you a lot less likely to do it again.
Absolutely. Is that sexual assault? No. Someone had the nerve to say, well, if they're vomiting on you on purpose during
it's a battery,
that's definitely assault. I'm like, no, fuck, who does that? No. Another person took the vomiting comment out of the context that I was presenting before I provided the details. In the context, you're gonna love this one, Bobby. They said, well, if I was a man,
hypothetical,
someone vomited and a woman vomited while taking me in, I would be very, very, very flattered and wouldn't take it as assault, or as I wouldn't be traumatized either. I would be flattered. I said, wow,
really, I thought you said okay.
Wow.
The ego. Okay.
Wow. And if y'all need to catch up, hot dog, with that, we're grown here. We're talking about oral sex, and someone, you know what I'm saying, is engaged in that activity and ends up vomiting because, you know what I'm saying,
something happens.
Yeah. I just now figured out many different scenarios why you could vomit, and that's deep. Okay, then we had this is actually a real person, because I know the guy. He said, well, I've had a couple of situations where a young lady's hygiene wasn't very good and it traumatized me, and I told her to stop and get up, but I wouldn't necessarily say that was assault either. And I was just like, this gets really, really, really interesting. But I think like a lot of these conversations and these hypotheticals and these questions come up, and we're gonna get to the elephant in the room. Speaking of Watchmen, spoiler alert. But anyways, we're gonna get to the elephant in the room, because I think there is a huge power dynamic that exists between males, you know what I'm saying, and females, or men and women, when we're talking about the act of sex, which really, really, really gets layered and nuanced when we're talking about, usually it's males that kind of like covet this, this power, you know what I'm saying, over women. But that changes when it's white women and black men. And so this is when a person said, well, consent cannot be revoked after it's been granted. And I'm like, whoa, that's problematic.
Yeah, it can.
At any stage. And then he said, well, if it can, then there's a lot of justification for all these white women, you know what I'm saying, that are accusing black men of sexual assault and rape after the fact, after they provided consent. And I was like, wow, he really opened up that bag. You know what I'm saying? The whole Emmett Till bag, you know what I'm saying? And, or, because Emmett Till didn't even have sexual relations. So, but we're talking about someone, who has a black man who has had sex with a white woman. And you brought up a good point. She feels traumatized from the criticism she gets from the public or her family. She could, be traumatized by the first time she ever saw a black person naked. Whatever. You know what I'm saying? All of a sudden, it's like this brings the whole idea of being traumatized equals sexual assault to a whole different nuance.
It does. I mean, I think that person is what that person said is exactly the reason why we can't expand the criminal code. So if you think in your head, under our current legal status, where consent is something that has to be given and it can be revoked at any time, if you think that it's not going to get dramatically worse for disenfranchised people, like legally disenfranchised people, like Black people specifically, if we allow for more stages of consent, then you're just not looking at what happens. And what he's referring to is somebody reclassifying consent that they already gave after the fact. That's different, though, than revoking consent. And it's an important, just like you being an English teacher, that's me being a lawyer. Because if your argument is, yeah, I said yes, and then after it was done, somebody told me I should have said no, so I said no, you didn't say no, you said yes. And then somebody told you should have said no, and now you're under social pressure. And so you want to reclassify an event that already occurred. That's not a revocation of consent. That's a reclassification of a completed event. And that's a different thing. Now, should we be concerned about that? Yeah, but that already happens under the current standard where we only have 3 phases of consent. So why would we open it up to a 4th phase where we triple those claims? Because that's what you're doing. If you say this white woman can sleep with this Black man, give consent, no revocation, talk to her parents, or her parents find out, and then they say, no, we actually didn't raise you that way. And she goes, you're right. I take it back. Because it was traumatic for me now that everybody in my community is looking down on me. That's trauma. Yeah, they're going to try and use that, of course. So do I think that that's completely predictable? Yeah, it's completely predictable, and we need to stay away from that. And we already can't stay away from it because people can always say they didn't consent during the act after the fact. That's already a danger that exists. But why would you double that danger?
It's really scary, though, man.
Why would you double that danger? That makes no sense.
But all this gets really scary when you talk about, having, romantic interactions or sexual experience with someone. It's just like, how can you keep yourself safe? There's so many different variables and things that you have to make sure are secure. I mean, and that's just one area of safety. We haven't even talked about the other areas of safety of protecting your health.
Well, think about like, what is that, Brittany Renner? I don't know, the one that Deion Sanders had come out and talk to his athletes.
Yeah.
So on one end of the spectrum, you have the person who can harm you in the criminal code. And on the other side, you have the person that can totally disrupt your financial future and your status. That can just completely destroy you.
And you know what, though? This could be a really good continuation because I got some other scenarios I want to talk about too. But when you talk about Brittany Renner, she's a very polarizing figure. And I think that I thought it was very interesting that he had her come out and speak to the young people. And her rise to fame is just very, very interesting.
That's LOL to me, but...
You said what?
Just the idea that not her, but that persona.
Exactly.
It's like that persona can become a profession is hilarious.
Exactly. That's where I was that's what I was getting, like, how you can just monetize certain,
but
like consulting, you know what I'm saying?
But there's a market. But there's a market for
it. Yeah. She's excellent at branding. But let me get at this real quick. Is it a form of sexual assault, speaking on her, because she talks about how athletes get trapped by these women or these professional groupies?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wouldn't it be a form of, sexual assault if there was the theft, of my sperm, without my consent? And then there was a life conceived from it?
So 2 things. One, I can't answer the scenario with legal precedent because it's too specific, but I can give you this example, this legal standard. What you give to a third person is no longer yours.
Okay, gotcha.
So what you donate to
Give it
somebody?
to her. What if you gave it to Trojan or Lifestyle?
That's a good question. I don't know that. I don't know the science and the
Yeah,
rates of success on that sort of operation.
exactly.
And I think
That's an actual thing, though.
of course it is. Of
Yeah,
course, people have tried to mine sperm from people that they think can generate income for them for as long as men have been having sperm. Of course, that's not new. But I don't have the answer to that question because that's a really specific question that I don't want to just get wrong. So people out here think that they know the answer when they don't.
Absolutely. You won't be responsible in it. But, the whole thing we do is just.
But I do want to answer your question about whether it's an assault with this. When I was in law school, we learned about a person who basically raised the case of rape by trick. So say that Logic and I looked similar enough that one could confuse him for me and for him. Now, Logic's better looking than me, so I'm not that lucky. But let's just say that one day I woke up as good looking as Logic or close, and we went out together, and Logic started a conversation with girl number one or whatever he's interested in, and I followed up, and I had that same conversation, or I didn't. Let's just say Logic had the conversation, and then we got back to the apartment where me and him both live. And again, we look similar. And that person ends up sleeping with me instead of Logic. And they enjoy it. Everything's great. 3 weeks later, they see me and him at the grocery store wearing different hats, and they finally realize we're not the same person.
Yeah, that happens with twins, I probably bet sometimes.
That is what happened. Anyway, this person tried to essentially instigate this criminal case, and the state lost because the legal doctrine is clear. The consent was given for the act. You're consenting to the act, period. So it didn't matter that the person wasn't who you thought they were. And the reason that this came up is we had people seeking rape claims because folks lie when they go to clubs. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. Guy works as a janitor. No disrespect to janitors. I hope they make that's a job.
Bobby, custodian.
But there's people that won't sleep with janitors. That's the thing. And so
the term is custodian.
You're right. So God is the king of custodial services, but that's not giving him play. So instead, he says he's a doctor. It induces this woman to sleep with him because she thinks that it's going to instigate a relationship with him because he's a doctor. She finds out he's not a doctor, comes back and says, I wouldn't have had sex with him hypothetically had I known. Okay, but you had sex with him consensually under false pretenses. We don't care. You had sex consensually. That's the answer. That's the answer. So these young men who are seeking people on IG or whatever, and they think that they're going to get a quick W out of the situation based on status, when this other person is literally going after them because of their status and their potential to get something for themselves. So what? That person, both of them are consenting adults. Whatever happens afterwards, that's their problem. That's just what it is.
Brings up an interesting conversation, maybe next time, which has been on my mind too, a continuation, is when we talk about, trans human beings.
Yeah, straight men have been attempting for a while to validate violent crimes.
I'm just waiting for a straight man to have relations with a trans human being, a trans woman, but listen, and then claim that it wasn't consensual because he was consenting to have sex with a human being that was born, identifies with the reproductive, organ that they were born with, like, a person with a vagina. So therefore they felt like they were raped because they didn't consent to have relations with a person that still has a penis, but doesn't identify with it. I'm just waiting for that to come up at some point.
And that has happened.
Oh, has it? Okay.
That's happened. but it doesn't usually come up in the context of a rape. And people can comment on this and say whatever they have to say about it.
Yeah, because I want us to be responsible too.
But
I don't want people to think that we're just bringing up these obtuse arguments to trigger people either. So that's why I'm being very careful of how we speak about it, because I don't want to like warrant or like warrant any kind of like violence towards trans human beings. So I just want to put that out there too. I'm just thinking out loud. But go ahead.
Well, here's the reason why I was going the route that I was going, because those cases don't end up being about rape. They end up being about murder. The trans person ends up getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what ends up happening.
Mm-hmm.
The straight male ends up killing the trans person,
mm-hmm.
and then using the legal defense in flagrante, or essentially temporary insanity, or something saying that I was enraged by this deception so much that, and I felt justified in doing it, or I couldn't control myself, etc. That's the context in which I've read about it, not in the context of whether or not a rape has occurred. Me
Gotcha.
as a straight male, cis-born male, my default response to that scenario as a lay person is to say that that's a form of deception that I would want an exception for, but there shouldn't be an exception for it, because it's the same exact scenario that I already raised. It's you undergoing an act under one set of beliefs when really it's an adjacent reality, but you still agree to do it. And that's the issue. And that's what people need to understand. It's the act that you're agreeing to. It's not so personalized that I'm only agreeing to sleep with you because I think you're attractive. But after you take off the makeup, or if it's a guy, after you take off the hairpiece, or what if you're wearing stilts and you're 6 inches shorter, all that stuff, it's all the same kind of deception. It's I approach person one on their appearance or my understanding of their status. That's not their status. That's not their appearance, but I agree to it. What? You agreed to it. You got deceived. Are we going to criminalize every time someone gets duped? I don't know that getting interpersonally deceived is a criminal act. I think that.
Sure it is.
I don't know. Well, yeah, if it's a
because where people's minds go, it goes to the shell game. It goes to con people and hustlers. Like,
but those are transactions.
Sex is a transaction too, though.
Sex can be a transaction, but we're not talking about transactional sex, though.
We're not talking about transactions.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing. Yeah. Like the vocabulary even is challenging.
And I think that is another cold debate that I've thought about, just being a former debate coach. Like, I think you can make the argument that every single sexual act is a transaction.
Okay.
Transactional.
But the problem with transactional sex, and this is something that I know in 2022, everybody has to be pro this and pro that. But listen, how do you enforce those agreements? How do you do it? So if sex worker agrees to sex act and man goes 1 inch beyond that, is that a breach of contract?
Well, you automatically go sex worker. I think there's transactional sex between husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend. You know what I'm saying?
Because I have to start there. I have to start there and then work my way back. I would work my way backwards, because at least you have an agreement to start with, and with a professional. There's at least an agriement.
But
it's not
that's the agreement that's thinly veiled in any relationship.
But why would you make the comparison between well, of course you're going to say it's not spontaneous, but semi-spontaneous relational sex between married people compared to
about it, though.
Well, I knew you were going to say that, but what I'm saying is that it's not like person one goes to wherever you get sex workers at, and the way that they seek that out, I don't know that that's comparable, to just two people cohabitating, making a decision that we're going to do this. I don't know that that's the same.
I would argue that in relationships where it's already established that our union is, based on us having sexual relations.
As a part of it, right?
I mean, like that's how we get, our different forms of sexuality. You know what I'm saying? I'm in a heterosexual, pansexual, gay relationship. Like it's rooted in how we, for the most part, we have those exceptions where celibacy can still be, in a relationship, that they can, but they're still attracted to each other. And the foundation is still, celibacy is still abstaining from an attraction that you have towards another person.
That's the difference between being an incel, right?
Yeah.
Being an incel. So
you say what? Oh, yeah.
But why does it matter? Okay, I guess I'll take you to the finish line. How does that change what we're talking about? Let's just say it's all transactional. Let's just say you win, and I'm not going to go into the weeds.
That's on the question. That's a great segue. Great Pisces minds
work. Why does it matter?
Why does it matter? Because this was going to be, I was setting you up for the alley-oop. You know what I do.
Okay.
Because we got to set up for the plan of action. But to set up for the plan of action, Bobby, I'm really was saying, how the heck did we get here? As human beings, how did we get so fundamentally engaged in the act where everything is just a transaction, it's contractual? I have to worry about if I'm going to go to court. You know what I'm saying? How did we get here? And I know there's a whole bunch of philosophical answers, but there's got to be a layperson's answer, like the elevator speech. You know what I'm saying? I got to get off on the 4th floor. I know you got to get off on the 12th floor. Can we get this over with? You know what I'm saying? Like, how the heck do we get here? It's like, it's very hard to even trust the person that you're having any kind of sexual interaction with when all these rules, enforcements, and all these potential pitfalls and minefields that you have to tap dance and moonwalk through.
Well, I think you're going to answer this the same way that I am, just because
I don't know, bro.
I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of experience listening to you talk about certain topics, and I think that the answer lies in our stepping away ever so gradually, year by year, from moral restrictions with regard to human sexuality. The further we get from the moral restrictions that we've sort of have been pervasive for like the last 400 years, and the more we just kind of do what we would have done otherwise, I think that it's going to result in more complication, because our baseline for the last 400 years, supposedly under the Western philosophy, is you have sex with one person and you're in a marriage with that one person. And generally, if you're a man, that one person owes you the intercourse anyway. So there's not a lot of discussions about when you get to have it and the terms of which you have it, because the man is in control of that sex and he's in control of that person that he has sex with. Now, as we walk away from that and we give each person bodily autonomy and say, you get to have sex with who you want to, and you get to, and it's Oprah, and you get to have sex, and you get to have sex, the further we go down that road, the more litigation we have, because it's so far from the model that we were designed to operate in within our legal structure.
Man, I think I would have said it differently. Yeah, that was what I'm getting at. I get the value. I just come down to that value system. I think our value system is so rooted in something that is, for the most part, for a lot of people, is counterintuitive.
Sure.
And it's just like, now we got to think about what's okay according to this value system that all my beliefs and my traditions are rooted in. Is this okay according to that? And if it's not, then it's like, God dang it. Now I can't do this because there's so much trauma and repercussions if I don't do it the traditional way. Sure. According to this value system. So yeah.
We wouldn't have.
That is how, you're right. That is how I think of it, but I didn't say it as eloquently as you.
Okay. Well, I would just say this. We wouldn't have the infragrante, defense for murder. We wouldn't literally have a whole defense for murder under the common law. If it wasn't for the fact that the expectation was based on sex being attached to marriage. Because what we allowed men to kill other men or their wives when they caught that woman sleeping with another man. that wasn't murder. There was a defense. There was a, yeah, I did it, but. And so guys were coming in saying, yeah, I killed her, but I caught her sleeping with somebody else. Or yeah,
self-defense though.
It was an affirmative defense that existed under the common law.
Oh my goodness.
But that's what I'm saying. It's evidence. It's evidence that the code is a derivative of the culture, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture that this entire nation was founded on. Wow. And so that's our starting point, like I said, and there's proof that it's our starting point because we're saying, men, you're allowed to have sex with your wives, period. Women, you're allowed to have sex with your husband only. Right. And now some of you men will have sex with other women, but if they're not married, it's okay. And that's fine. That's adultery.
That's why a lot of men feel like it's okay. That's why a lot of men think that there's no such thing as rape in a marriage.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, because I used to be on the books too, if I'm not mistaken, that, like pretty much mandated and obligated to have sex with your husband.
Yeah. It would be really married. Well, because the question would have been, what am I being prosecuted for? Mm-hmm. I'm allowed to have sex with this person. This person is obligated to have sex with me. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Go read the good book. That would kind of be the response. And obviously we're not in the Wild Wild West anymore, but I think looking at the history of the code is important because it shows us culturally how we arrived here. And that was kind of the question that you asked. I think the question that I have for you is, how do we get to a point where, what would it take for us to teach our young people that sex is a part of the human experience, and your only restraint really needs to be, sexual health, and then also consent. Like, those are the restraints. Those are the restraints that everybody should operate in. But outside of that, I don't know that restraints are necessary. Like Kanye had that line that it's only deception if you're not telling me. Like, that was, without using all the explicitives, but he was talking about how monogamy was basically a forced idea, and his idea of deception was someone doing that and not telling him. Yeah. Now, I couldn't do that. My ego's not set up that way, and I can admit that.
AKA swingers, open marriage.
I don't have it in me, but yeah. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that our culture should be set up in such a way that we say everybody has to do it in this manner, and if you don't, criminal consequences are likely. But that is kind of our default setting.
So what's your question?
What do you think it would take? What do you think it would take to get us to a safer, a sexually safer place? And I've heard you talk about this. The reason why I'm asking, because it incorporates our LGBTQIA folks. It incorporates our alternative lifestyle and alternative relationship folks. I think the answer to this question does. Mm-hmm.
First of all, we got to start having these conversations with our children is, when they get to, an age when they can actually appropriately communicate these ideas. And I think we'd be surprised if we take the limitations and the restrictions off of what we think children are capable of, like, absorbing and understanding that, as soon as they can start communicating with you is when you start having these conversations. And I think we don't do that enough. Let me give you one specific example of how you can change this dynamic. We need to stop as soon as there is a naked body being exposed to a child to automatically be like, that's sexual. No, that's not true. That's not. That totally disrupts, the trajectory of their value system when it comes to a naked body. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of a sudden, it's just like, now a naked body is just something ain't right. Unless you're watching National Geographic and there's a certain, group of people that are being presented alongside, adjacent to animals, that it's okay to see them naked and it's not sexual. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's where it gets deep. And I think that one of the, and I talk about this in my poetry and I talk about this in my memoir a lot. And people take it the wrong way. But if you have an open mind, if you look at it from a scholarly and just being emotionally intelligent, one of the most healthiest things that ever happened to me was me remembering where, I call it a Mama Gets Dressed show, where I would sit on the bed and my grandmother would just come into the room after she, got out of the shower and be like, "You're in my room." Yeah. And that's where I saw, like, I'm saying, the light skin, the blue veins, and the stretch marks and all that. And I'm like, and she was like, "Well, if you don't like what you see, you can get out of my room. You're in my room." But that taught me that a woman's body, number one, is not there for like the sexual pleasures of a man. It's just a body. Like, it's just a body. You know what I'm saying? And we wouldn't be getting into this whole argument in the debate, which is really silly. It's if women should be allowed to breastfeed in public. Like, are you serious? Like, where have we come? And then, you know what? I'm not trying to sex shame anybody if that's how they're wired, because I just think that garners some reflection. But where are you in your, how can I put this?
Oh, you're asking if their knuckles are off the ground?
No. That's not what I'm trying to say. Where are you in your emotional disposition when you see a woman breastfeeding a child that turns you on sexually? And that we need to have a discussion about if women should be allowed to do that because it's inappropriate. Like, I just want to know where you at in your emotional disposition where this is an actual issue, where we have to worry about other human beings looking at that as a sexual act.
Do you look away? Let me ask you that.
I look away to protect the privacy. And I know that sounds weird when it's in public, because I don't want the woman to feel uncomfortable, because I understand the dynamic and the nuance. It's
so that's the thing about it that I don't understand, right? So I was on an airplane and this person had like a brand new child.
Right.
And I don't know why. Huh?
I said right.
Yeah, they're just right next to me, and I don't know why, but I like babies, so I'm just looking at you playing with them or whatever. And then
don't be playing with them while they're breastfeeding, though, bro. That's
no. And then the mother decides that the child needs to eat. So I'm looking at the child, and then they start this process, and then I am doing all this effort to do a 180 in an airplane chair, so that they don't think that I'm looking at them.
Yeah.
And
that's what you're supposed to do, though.
This person is looks at me and they're like, it's okay. And I'm saying, well, it's okay with you, but it may not, I don't want the person next to you to think that I'm looking at you doing that. It's really not about.
That's a deep one. I like that one. That's a good one.
It's not about
what.
Yeah, it really, it messed with me because
yeah,
I didn't care that she was doing that, but I cared that somebody else would mischaracterize what was happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the same. You know what? That's a very good example, man. Man, that's a man. Because that's exactly, but you know what? In typical logic form, I just be like, man, it doesn't bother me if people feel that way. But that's exactly how I feel when I share that Mama Get Dressed show. I'm like, man, people are like, well, Logic's a weirdo. See, I told you, man, he's looking at his grandma naked. I wasn't looking at her like that, bro.
You're just there.
I'm just there. I'm like, but it taught me so much respect to have for women's bodies. You know what else? Another thing is an interesting dynamic. It's like they have Greek statues and these guys are just butt naked.
Yes. But they value different things than we did.
Huh?
But they value different things than we did.
Yeah, that's what they say. I'm just
That's,
saying, man.
that's funny for the nerds out there that know what he's saying. That's funny for the nerds out there that know what he's talking about right now. These smart people jokes, you doing too much.
Yeah, these college, they used to say, man, you with these collegiate jokes. But listen, but it's like we grew up on these statues, going to the museums, seeing these white guys with these like chiseled bodies with these little penises.
Here you go. Here you go.
No, I'm being serious.
That's what I was talking about, though. That's what I was saying. Like again, like that's another thing where you'd say, at least because I went to an all boys school, they'd be like, no homo. Like, why'd you see it? But
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like your response to that would be different at different times of your life. Like now you see the statue, you'd be like, oh, that's David. But then in high school, I'd be like, man, why they make David 8 feet tall and then do him like that? Like you'll be saying stuff like that. So I just
think that speaking of high school, we've gotten so far away from just being, I don't even want to use the word normal, just being secure in our bodies. Like, feel me? Like, I work at a high school and I've been in education for 24 years. The degree of culture, the degree that the culture has changed in like the last 15 years is incredible. It's like it's almost unheard of for you to shower.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I remember in middle school, you could possibly get dock points if you didn't shower. That's number one. Number two is you wouldn't be caught dead or alive after PE
Musty
in front of a young lady that you're trying to like, you know what I'm saying? Now they just skip the whole shower and just go and do the axe bathing.
No, we weren't doing axe.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that.
The right guard, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? But that was after we actually showered.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I'm saying? And you might be discreet about it, you know what I'm saying? But you were still showering. Now you're not doing that.
But
you're not doing that.
But you do understand that I'll make it a verb, the world starization of just everyday life in school. I mean, nobody wants to be the subject of a TikTok or an IG video, or nobody wants to be sexually exploited or made fun of because of something they don't have control over. I mean, you can get roasted for anything. We had a kid when I was in middle school, and I joke about this now because it shows how terrible human beings we were at the time. But like they had a birthmark on their ear. It made the top of the person's ear black, and we used to call that person burnt ear.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was hilarious to us. But
a young lady who got caught slipping with the curl on it.
This is a dude. But I'm just saying, like, imagine if you didn't have the largest penis, or you did have a third nipple, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Something that nobody should know about until, frankly, it's too late.
Right.
Like until they already care enough about you for you to expose yourself to them on that level, right? So now you're exposing that part of you to them that maybe you don't even feel good about, but at least they already care about you. Whereas now we live in a world where people will take a picture, they'll post it, they'll put you in a position where you'll never have an opportunity to get close to somebody because of this thing about you that nobody's supposed to know anyway. And so I think that that's a completely relevant concern that people have.
Yeah.
When I was at O'Day, the guys that took a shower at the school that weren't upperclassmen, like that would shower, we thought some of them
all day.
We thought they were gay.
Yeah.
And you could take that as a positive or a negative. And look, I've made peace with how far I've come on my homophobia at that time. Right. But we thought they were gay because we were like, why would you share that space with them when all you can have happen is negative? All you can have is people talking about you from this. And you're choosing to do this with other dudes?
You know what's crazy about that is like we're 15 minutes. We're 15 years like roughly apart from each other. And we went to the same school. And when I went to all day, when you went to all day, that was common. We just take showers.
And it should have worked the same way culturally. It should have been, it's all dudes here, nobody cares. That's what would make sense.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But that's because that's how it worked for everything else.
Exactly. I was about to say.
The racism, the
Yep.
jokes that were completely over the line that I
Yeah.
love and cherish to this day,
Yes. The bully.
all of that stuff was okay
I
because there
loved
were
it.
no girls. And so I was never embarrassed.
Yeah.
You could say anything to me and it was going to be all jokes. And if you took it personal, you were soft. But
Right.
but not that. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
That was different.
That's a whole different episode in itself, man. We can get Roscoe on here, Big Red, we can get Jermaine, all the Roy, all my cats that I went to school with, and then you can get your cats, man. But a lot of stuff has changed since Logic Amen and Miles Gaskin.
Oh man. Well, I'll just say this, like, and I don't know if this is gonna be PC because it's just not. And that's the nature of that school is non-PC, which is what I loved about it, even when I was there, which was like
that's the nature of private schools.
You would say like, hey, there's going to be some gay stuff that happens later, but I'm not gay though, and everybody would just be like, okay, sure, and people would do some stuff that was really suspect at the time. And
yeah,
now
I don't know, man. Now you get into
stuff anymore.
Now. Yeah, but that's what we would say about the white guys.
Oh, for sure, they were on it.
Yeah.
That's what
we were the minority there. Like out of the 500 students that went there, like what 150 maybe, what I'm saying, were black when I went there.
60 to 100.
Yeah, if that. I think it only seems like it probably wasn't even 150 out of 500 because that doesn't sound right. But I just think it was so much of the quality rather than the quantity. It's like,
well, everybody was there. And this is what Killer Mike talks about, and I've talked about this before. It's selective diversity, and you can say that you hate it if you're not a part of it, and it makes sense to resent it. But they're not taking everybody; they're taking who they want. They're taking who they want for their purposes.
So you got on one end, on one spectrum. It was a spectrum of black people, and we didn't got way off the topic. We're gonna get back on topic, but there was a spectrum. Feel me, where you had like the most elite black athletes, then you had like some of the most elite black intellectuals who had to actually test to get in. You know what I'm saying? I was kind of like on that spectrum a little bit, but then you had some of the people who were there that you don't know why they were there, who were like murderers. Like, no, when I went to O'Day, we had an actual classmate who murdered another human being, and then came to school.
What year were you there?
Yes.
What year?
91.
Okay, you were there before. Jamal Banks used to always say that he would have killed somebody if he didn't go there. So, but you know what?
Look, Merrick Murray, man. Merrick Murray was murdered by O'Day High School classmate of mine.
That's crazy.
Merrick Murray.
But you know what? If we didn't take kids that weren't just elite, it would be pointless, in my opinion. So,
okay, that is the perfect private school answer. And so, listen, that's it. And that comes down to the plan of action. Like, that is how we got here. When we start talking about what's consensual, what's not consensual, what's sexual assault, what's rape, and what's not, is because we raise children in all these different tribes and silos, and they have different value systems based on the village they were raised in. See how I did that?
You brought us back. Brought us back. Fast of the time.
but what I'm saying is, I think that we come from a position of privilege that we can have these conversations and be so comprehensive because we had the privilege to flow in and out of so many different value systems, so many bubbles and silos. And we are having this conversation because the private school track led to the university track, which is a whole different value system when you're talking about rape and sexual assault and what is and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really scary, man. At 46 years old, I look back at a lot of the ways that we were living in the culture. And I value and appreciate my parents so much. It's like, how did I escape the pitfalls of so many problematic and absolutely gross injustices against other people?
Sure. You got lucky. What happened?
Yeah, but what happens when people consent to those gross injustices and they don't know that they were gross and unjust and that they were assaulted until they're educated? Like, oh, that's what we were talking about earlier. Oh, that's what that was? I thought that's culture, what you're supposed to do.
Well, I think that's why it's important to talk about, and this kind of is also a good transition off of the school conversation. That's exactly why teachers shouldn't be having sex with students. That's exactly why if you're in the faith community, people who have power in the church shouldn't be sleeping with parishioners, because those lines become challenging for everyday people to understand whether they're allowed to say no, whether or not their consent is truly voluntary comes into question. And for my plan of action, I would just cut to the finish line and say that assume there are no freebies. Assume that if there's ever a time where you aren't really sure whether or not you can do what you want to do, that as unsexy as it is, go ahead and ask. Because I would rather kill the mood than become a registered sex offender. I would rather kill the mood than allow somebody, even who doesn't go to the police, to use my name in a sentence that involves that person coerced, forced, or manipulated or pressured me into doing something. That is a reputation you do not want to have. Furthermore, I will end this with a personal anecdote. I had an experience in my early 20s where somebody asked me to come over to sleep with them. And the word was sleep in the text message, literal. So I had no idea what that meant. I went over there, and this person wanted to spoon, to cuddle, I guess.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of that, I decided that I wanted to potentially see what there was potential for. And so like I said, the word sleep was unclear to me whether that's a literal translation. Like, I don't understand, because you could sleep alone. So that's weird to me. So anyway, I started to proceed on doing something I wanted to do. And then that person said nothing at all, no words. They also did nothing. So they were allowing, and this is something I did with my hands. So, and it was not on a pubic area. So there's that. But they didn't respond to it. They did not say stop. They didn't say go. They didn't push away. They didn't push closer. And I felt so uncomfortable from that scenario that I just never talked to that person again. In the same context. Because I felt like it was an open invitation for me to be in trouble. That's what I thought. That's what I was left with. And that the least that they could have done was say no to me. I actually thought that being told no would have been more helpful, because it wouldn't have put me in a space where I would have done something I knew they didn't want me to do.
Yeah. It's that gray area, that neutral area that's incredibly scary for men, specifically Black men. And I totally understand what you're talking about.
And so I would just say that if I could go back, I wouldn't have even went over there because
Yeah.
because I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't actually know.
Yeah. Maybe we
You
should stop using the medieval term "sleep with me" and just be like, "What do you really want?"
so
You know,
you
some
so
people just might want just company. I think we just need to say that. I just want company.
so you will encounter people in your life as a man or woman that will tell you that the ambiguity is the opportunity zone. That is not true.
Mm,
You cannot operate in that space in 2021 moving forward.
that's super.
Do do not think that the space of yes, no, and maybe is a space that you can afford to learn how to manipulate. It
Mm,
is only a space where trouble awaits you, and that's what I would leave it with.
yeah. My mind, and yeah, thanks for that, man. That was good, man. Um, mine is a lot more simpler and philosophical, but I think that we can grasp it and get something out of it. It's like my plan of action is like teach our children and teach ourselves to value the person more than the actual experience, and don't ever put the experience above a person. And I know that sounds really philosophical. I know that sounds chicken before the egg, blah blah blah. You know what I'm saying? But I think if you just start with valuing that person and not the experience and putting the experience over that, then you're gonna stop doing a lot of stuff that you would do that could be incredibly problematic. And I'll just leave it at that. You know what I'm saying? Because that can go so many different ways. It's just like if you value the person over the experience, then you know that there's just certain people that you're not going to have certain experiences with because you value that person
Right.
more than you do the experience of whatever it is. So, anyways, man, it's been good. Please share this video, get into the comments, please. And I should have said that all through the video because this was a good one. And I trust that we planted some seeds and threw out some breadcrumbs for you to investigate more. Bobby, it's been great. We out.